All right, Will, so let's go all the way back to your introduction to the sport.
So,
How old were you when an ESPN notification goes off? How old were you when you were introduced to the sport? Were you playing anything else leading up to it, or were you kind of like rugby centric from the get-go?
well, I was first introduced to the sport at the age of 5. So I was very, very young. And it was my dad basically decided he wanted to take me down as youngest son to the local rugby club in Cambridge in England. And it was really probably just to see his mates there, and they were bringing their other sons along. But ultimately fell in love with it. And I played a whole range of sports when I was younger, from soccer to field hockey to cricket, to tennis, you name it, anything. I was a bit of a sort of sport fanatic, but also just sort of sports, just how I rolled, really. I wanted to always be running and playing and with the ball in hand or by my feet. So I think I was probably always destined to be involved in sport in the future.
So what is the transition from a sport like soccer to a sport like rugby like? I mean, rugby is truly unlike anything else in the way that it's played.
Yeah, it is to a degree, and I guess back in the 1800s, whenever it was, when a guy called William Webb Ellis at rugby school picked up the ball, quite literally just picked up this football-shaped ball, and started running with it, and that was the birth of rugby. And but there's a lot of similarities in the way that in our sport we can kick at any time. And certainly the position that I played, which was a playmaker, fly half, that was one of your kind of roles. You had to kick field position, you had to kick goals, field goals, conversions, scoring points on the board for your team. So there was always a real sort of close comparison with the soccer game, or certainly techniques. Um, but then you have the physical contact element of rugby, which makes it very different, put it that way.
How old were you when you were in the Junior World Championship in 2013?
So I think I was 19 at the time. This was when I was playing for England under 20s. A surreal moment, really, when you were young and you're representing for me, the country of birth at the time. And yeah, I guess when you're young in your professional career, I turned professional at the age of 18, and to then be selected in an international squad as well, for age grade was amazing. And to then go and win the world championship, it's a feat that England at the time had never done. I was surrounded by a load of really high quality players who have now gone on to bigger and better things. Some didn't really go on to have much of a career in rugby, but yeah, at the age of 19, you kind of felt like the world was at your feet back then, because you were world champions, and at such a young age.
When you decided to go pro at 18 and then a year later are winning a world championship, how do you process that?
I think it's just all part of the process of the ladder that is professional sport. And I just mean that in terms of the pathway. I entered professional rugby at the age of really kind of probably 17 the year before, even though I was still at school. And this was with like full grown men. You are in a position, I remember it was put very bluntly, is you're here as a 17, 18-year-old to take the jobs of grown men with kids, with family, you name it. They've been in this industry for a while. You're there just beginning to try and take their jobs. As for then the becoming world champion with the under 20s, that was always the pathway to get into the under 20s was the last cutoff for an age grade, if you know what I mean. So there was teams for under 18s, under 19s, under 20s, but under 20s was always deemed like the last age grade youth international program. Everyone's professional as well, all at the age of between probably 18 to 20. And you really wanted to be in that team to solidify, I think, going back to what I was saying about, right, I started professional rugby. I'm in the big grown men world of the sport. But I've also got to make sure that I stand out and being one of the best in my age group. And that was the way of doing it. And becoming world champion, I would say, was almost like a need to do that to prove a point, not just even personally, but I think collectively for a whole squad and for us as an age grade that we were good enough to play professional men's rugby. And I think we showed that by, in our age grades, I keep saying, becoming world champions.
In a sport where the average career is nearly 2 decades, how do you make a name for yourself as a 17 or 18-year-old on a national team?
It's a great question. I think for those who went on and actually played for the full, let's say, England team, so the main men's England team at such a young age, some did from that under 20s team, some did literally the next year go and play, um, you know, for the men's national team. Um, I just remember those guys being so sort of starstruck to a degree, but also just almost feeling like an imposter syndrome. When you're so young, you think that the world's at your feet, yes, but also you're like, am I ready for this? Um, but I think just taking that all into context of if it's when you're young, you're almost playing your best because you're carefree, you're just enjoying the game still. You're not fully engrossed by coaches telling you all tactics of this. You're just playing naturally, and I think for those who I didn't play international men's rugby until later, until I was 25, and in the end, it was actually for the USA, which is we'll maybe get onto in a minute. But I think when you're young, you just sort of yeah. You are a bit starstruck, but probably just embrace the fact that you're just loving the game and you're obviously then doing it at the biggest stage, which feels amazing.
What was your support system comprised of at that point? I mean, did you have a strong family connection that was kind of keeping you grounded? Were there coaches or other trainers that were like, "Will, chill out, like you have time"?
Yeah, I think I think my family was always incredibly supportive. I mean, my dad and mum, my brother, my dad probably more than anyone because he was the one that got me into the game. He had played, some decent rugby when he was growing up as well, and I think naturally, sort of, probably he wasn't a professional, but he knew, excuse me, he knew that this can be taken away from you so quickly an injury, but lack of performance, not getting a professional contract. And therefore, it was always a matter of like, just, you know, keep your mind focused, be involved in other things. I had a good education. I then, even in my early 20s, started doing a part-time degree alongside playing professional rugby just to make sure that I was a well-rounded individual. And albeit, the success that I might have been having as a young age in my young professional career, it was always knowing that you were all I always felt in my career I was always chasing something. I was always trying to get into the squad, or I never felt that I ever got it easy anyway. So maybe I collectively, with also my parents, just making sure that I stayed, grounded. I never felt that I was too, ahead of myself.
Can you work me through your professional team schedules? I mean, you were kind of hopping around every few years in the early 2020s.
Yeah, so playing professional rugby, obviously in the UK in the Premiership, the sort of highest league there really is. I would say probably even globally, but particularly in the UK. And I came all the way through a team called Northampton Saints. I was with them since the age of 12. I got through the academy into the first team and played, which was everything to me and fantastic, and the whole lifestyle and everything like that. But there's always times in sport it's either cutthroat or you're looking for opportunities that might be better. And one of them I believed, and in hindsight, maybe I look back and say I'm not sure it worked out completely, but I then went to Exeter Chiefs and got signed up there, and that was another incredible experience. I met my wife down there as well in the southwest of England. But I guess in pro sport, you do have those people who are at one club or one franchise for the whole of their career, fantastic. But then you also, you know, I think once you move once, you realize the career is so short. Ultimately, you've got to take your opportunities. And I think in my career, I tried to take the opportunities as best as possible, and had a few clubs in my career, not loads, but they gave me experiences, in different ways, which were brilliant and mostly great, some not so great, but I thoroughly enjoyed the journey.
When you have a professional academy tagging you at 12 years old, how do you continue to differentiate yourself?
I think it's always a concern that I actually have with now looking back, and I know when I speak with parents, is just to make sure that, particularly in the soccer world in the UK, everyone's trying to get a head start. Everyone's trying to get maybe their kids into an academy at the age of 8 or 9 or 10. And yeah, I'm always a little bit concerned because ultimately you're still so young and you're still so fresh. I said to you earlier how I play lots of different sports. I was always probably advocated to do that from my parents because there was always the fear of getting burnt out. You do too much at such a young age, but you always, you know, you wanted to a degree, I'm almost contradicting myself. You do want to try and get into the best place possible. I probably knew by the age of about 14, 15 that I did want to become a professional rugby player. And therefore my sort of scheduling and logistics sort of catered in a way that maybe I played less of those other sports and I did more focused on rugby. In terms of what you mean though, in terms of what stood me out, I think I was a late developer, and in a contact sport like rugby, I probably struggled a little bit when I was young because I wasn't a big person. I didn't hit puberty probably until a bit later. Meanwhile, some of my friends did that all really early, looked like they were destined for greatness at the age of 13, 14, and then kind of fell off because everyone caught up. I think maybe my differential thing in me, maybe when I was young, is I really understood the game. I loved it. As I say, I was a fan. I watched so much rugby. I was kind of obsessed, and I think the professionals you'll meet in whatever sport, they're obsessed, almost unhealthily obsessed with the sport or sports in general, just knowing the tactics. And I think I was quite aware that I had a brain on me and therefore used it. I wasn't the quickest, I wasn't the biggest. I didn't necessarily have the best skill, but I could read a game pretty well and I was a good communicator. I look back now and I'd probably say that's what I had at a young age, which maybe stood me out into compared to others.
What do you think made you a good defenseman?
Well, the great thing in rugby is you've got to be all round. You're not just part of a defense team. You're not just part of a offense team. You are on the field the whole time. And I think when I was young, I had no fear. I put my head in dark places. I wanted, I wanted to tackle. I wanted to be involved in the physical game. I think when I got older and I unfortunately had some injuries and some concussions in there, like quickly realized maybe I wasn't quite as wanting to get my head stuck in terms of that way, and was maybe a bit more wise and experienced as to choosing the times when to get involved or not. And I mean that professionally, you can't hide in rugby, but just when to just to not try and throw your whole body weight into someone who's 2 times the size of you. Maybe let use his body weight to then sort of stop his momentum. But yeah, it's you have to be a good defender in whatever position you are on a rugby field because you are literally always involved and you might be needed at any time. It's not like the quarterback, who gets the limelight for doing the passing. Well, you've also got to be the ability to do a try, save, and tackle. So yeah, everyone's got to defend in rugby.
What kind of person do you think is drawn to the sport of rugby?
I think it's a really charismatic sport. I think, yes, you've got to want to be physical. I think if you're not a physical person, both of the men's and women's game, then I can't see how you're going to love the sport. I think we're all like that. Some people are just want to get their knees dirty and get into it. And I was like that as a kid. I was the first one to jump into that puddle. I was the first one to slide across the muddy turf. Like so you've got to have that in you. But also just the charisma of what rugby brings, the camaraderie and team togetherness is something so unique. I know there's other sports, I know there's team sports and things like that, but you kind of do put your body on the line. There's traditional elements to rugby as well. It's been around for a long time, and clubs and just sort of networks and culture. The rugby culture is unique. It's a bond, and I think everyone's very proud of that in our sport. And I think that's what makes it genuinely different to an American football, maybe other contact sports where maybe you see those stars and they're amazing. I love the way America does their stars, but at the same time, it's a bit out there and a bit bravado. And I feel like rugby's it teaches you great morals, respect, and you do that together in a physical way. You know, they always say there's an infamous quote by Winston Churchill, the former UK Prime Minister back in the Second World War, and he described rugby perfectly. He said it's a thug's game played by gentlemen. And that exactly is what it is. It's a physical game, but you respect each other on the field and off the field as well.
That kind of leads me right into 2018 when the US team picked you up. What was the difference in going in playing the same sport in a country that wasn't so steeped in history and legacy and charm?
Well, a little bit of the backstory of how I got into that sort of US squad was my grandmother was born and raised in Los Angeles. So by heritage, I could qualify to play for the United States. I didn't make the men's England national team. So therefore, if I had done that and played one game for England, then I wouldn't have been able to play for the USA. Just on, you can't cross purpose your nationality. So it was in my career, and the story, very long story short, was basically my dad ended up sitting next to this American guy in the stands in one game that I was playing in, and in the end, it was my dad's mum who was American, and the guy was like, "Hold on, well, why are you watching?" He's like, "Well, that's my son out there," and the guy who was American was like, "Hold on a minute, so your son has an American connection." This guy in the end turned out to be on the board of directors for USA Rugby. So he then said to my dad, he said, "Well, your son can qualify for the US." And my dad, I remember, turned around to me, him, and basically he said to us, like, "Yeah, I know he can." And it was almost like waiting for when this opportunity might be right. Because obviously it was a very proud thing for my dad, for my family to be able to have this connection. And through kind of my agent and conversation between USA Rugby and myself, um, I was offered the chance to come into camp and there was this real excitement that US rugby was growing. I had family connection to the country. I know it would make my family incredibly proud, and this opportunity to play international men's rugby, the highest rugby you can play, and try and go to a rugby World Cup, which happens every 4 years. That was something on my radar. I was like, I want to achieve this, and also I want to do it. That's gonna, as I say, make my family proud. I think doing it as well with a sort of group that was destined to grow, not just on the field but also off the field, the sport in America, and try and be part of that was also really appealing. And in the end, yeah, late 2017, but really the beginning of 2018, I ended up wearing a USA jersey. Funnily enough, my first game was in Los Angeles. It was almost fate. Like my first USA game representing the USA was in the same place that my grandmother was born in. Just felt right.
When you are looking at joining a team that is growing as opposed to continuing a legacy, how do you see the domestic growth of rugby playing out in the US?
It's really interesting. I think obviously I'm biased because I had my whole playing career and now I'm involved in like the business and media end of Major League Rugby, the professional rugby competition here in the United States. And I'm trying to help with that growth. It's it's a hard task. You're dealing in a sports market here in America that is incredibly competitive. The NFL, the NBA, the NHL, the MLB, you name it. We all know them. And yet rugby has to try and find its niche within that sort of landscape. I think it's doing that well because of what I said before about what is so unique about our sport. Whenever an American comes to a game or whenever, certainly even when I was playing, and they watch the sport, they see the sort of respect, they see the intensity. It's a fast paced, fluid game. There's not breaks all the time. We're not waiting for a stoppage and play or a timeout. We're just going. And I think they love that. It's about getting it in front of the American sports fan, which is always challenging. But I have never any doubt that the growth of the game here in the US on the domestic front is there. It's getting more into clubs and high schools, big programs that are involved in that. And then the big sort of carrot at the end of all of this is the Rugby World Cup in 2031 for the men, and then in 2033 for the women here in the United States. And that for me is like all that growth is going towards that direction. And a reminder for people who don't know, the Rugby World Cup is the third biggest sporting event on the planet. Number one being the soccer FIFA World Cup, number two being the Olympic Games, and number three is the Rugby World Cup. For revenue, for spectators, for engagement, it's the third biggest in the world. So having that in America is going to just send it into a new stratosphere. And I really am hoping between now and then after that competition, the growth of rugby is only going to massively increase. And hopefully we can see the ability like soccer has had in this country that it really starts to properly take off.
So what do Americans have to do in the next 6 years leading up to that to set the groundwork for prominence in rugby going into the World Cup?
I think we, as I said before, we need to get rugby balls into kids' hands as early as possible. Get them aware of the sport and educated in the sport as soon as possible. And I mentioned about the physical nature of the sport, yes, but then when you're at a young age playing tag rugby, learning about positional work, communication, respect, rugby gives that an abundance. It's such a community sport amongst as anything. Yes, then once you go from being younger and you start tackling and it being a bit more physical, then you know who really wants to sort of play it or not. But just having the education, because that person may not be a professional rugby player at the age of 6, 7, 8, later down the line in 10 years' time, but they might be a rugby fan. And that's what we have to try and do. We have to make it more accessible and get the awareness out there as much, whether that's we're working really hard, Major League Rugby, with big national TV providers. We're working trying to hard in social media aspects and trying to push it out there. We don't have huge amounts of resources. And as I say, we're going up against incredibly tough markets. But trying to do that is the way that it will progress. And and then also I think to a degree tapping into those sports markets in the United States. We do have crossover athletes where people who haven't made it in the NFL are starting to come to rugby and start to show their colors and be brilliant rugby players. We need to try and do that as much as we possibly can. But I think the focus is definitely the awareness of the sport and the education. And that can start at such a young age. And I know that's definitely the direction that Major League Rugby wants to try and go with some of the programs they have, like Imagine Rugby, which is a big program across the US trying to get rugby into schools. And then equally putting rugby, the Major League Rugby competition on TV, people can see it. People saw, for example, the Olympic bronze medal with Alona Mar and the women's team for the USA get that bronze. Well, people saw that, and therefore people are engaged and interested. We need to do more of that.
When you are kind of analyzing where the franchises are now in the US, they're all over the country. Where do you see the next potential landing spots for teams being?
We're always on the lookout, and maybe this is not completely my department, but I'm always on the lookout as well. 11 teams at the moment, excuse me, across the US, from the East Coast to Central to the Midwest and the West Coast. I know for a fact that expansion has already been talked about in a couple of cities. I'd love to see a team in your neck of the woods in Nashville and Tennessee. I think that'd be fantastic. There's been conversation in Indianapolis, St. Louis. I know there's also been a conversation in the Bay Area. I think California is an absolute hotbed for rugby. It'd be great to see an Austin franchise back in Major League Rugby. They dipped out of Major League Rugby a few years ago. So I think the big thing as well is yes, you want to spread it around the US, but the United States is such a big country. I think we also need to make sure that we get into them. I keep using this word markets, the regions that are rugby orientated. Southern California is a big one. Texas, the Northeast, the Northwest. in the Seattle area, making sure that we're in good communities that know about the sport, or certainly having the sport really growing. I think if you try and spread yourself thin and have teams everywhere in the US, from Montana to Detroit to Oklahoma, I'd love that. Absolutely love that. But I think you got to really try and target the places that you can really grow the sport quickly and where it's already sort of prominent as well.
What led to stepping away in 2023?
It was kind of always planned. And the great thing about it, and this is my ego, but I'm very proud to say it, is I made the decision on my own terms. I could have continued playing. Contract was there, basically in front of me to continue for another 2 years. But then I also had this opportunity in the media and what I wanted to get involved in. And as I mentioned before, I was doing things on the side when I was playing. I've been professional for 12 years. I achieved what I achieved. Would I have liked to have done more? Absolutely. Did I achieve everything I wanted to do? No. Um, I think injuries as well played a part. I think a good few concussions in my career. I was very aware. I always got great assistance, great medical treatment. I never felt pushed to come back or anything like that, and made sure I saw specialists. So I feel relatively safe, but at the same time, I contact sport takes it out of you, and particularly head injuries. I didn't want to be in a position where I couldn't have my next career because I wasn't healthy enough. So I think for me, it all accumulated at a time in 2023 where that was my mark. This opportunity came up, and it was right therefore for me to step away and leave the dance floor. And I think a lot of sports people struggle with that. And because I made the decision on my own terms, because I'm doing what I wanted to go into as well, I've never looked back and thought, God, I wish I was still playing. And that is a really nice feeling to have 18 months on from when I left the field in my final game.
What do you bring as a commentator to rugby broadcasts?
I think out here in the US, where I guess my niche is being involved in USA Rugby, Major League Rugby, being a player, knowing all the guys really well, connecting with them, having that insight and access, which as an analyst is really important. And then equally in a production world where, as we've been talking about in this whole conversation, rugby is new, it's growing. Therefore, if my play-by-play commentator is not completely, and he knows a lot about rugby or she knows a lot about rugby, I'm there giving the sort of to the audience the whys. Why do people think like this? Why have they done that? And then equally that sort of I've been in those field positions like the quarterbacks that retired and they're in the booth whereby they know what's going to about to happen. They've seen it before. They've been in that position and likewise, I also try. I love storytelling, so I'm always up for conversation, and that's why I love and fell in love with the media, and that's why I try and bring energy. My accent may not be American, but hopefully it comes out as certainly being good diction and explaining what's going on.
When you look at I mean, you talked about concussions. I was looking up some recent studies that have been done all over the world, but specifically out of the UK Rugby Health Project and the University of Glasgow. I saw that the University of Glasgow had done a study of 31 brains of rugby players, and of those 31 brains, they had found CTE in 68% of them. And then the US Rugby Health Project did a 2021 study with rugby players, and a fifth of those players said they wouldn't ask for help if they needed it. How do you combat that kind of underlying mental health crisis in rugby players?
I think it's probably first definitely worth saying how the game has changed a lot since the days of the past. And a lot of the cases that have coming up, those who might be, whether it's chronic, whether it's minor, um, that it's changing because of the protocols that are in place. Unfortunately, back even as early as about 10 years ago, protocols weren't in place that if someone had a concussion, they were taken from the field, they were not allowed back on, and they had to do X amount of weeks recovery and also have recovery access to hyperbaric chambers or whatever it might be. That just wasn't there. And I think that's the glaring issues, unfortunately, of the past that are now coming to the present. I like to think the sport is in a better and safer place with how it's officiated, the laws, the tackle heights, but then definitely with a if you've got a head knock or had a head knock, you're removed from the field. There's no questions about it. It's not even, oh no, well, I wasn't, nope, you get moved away. And I think therefore, like these studies are really important to show like the impact of when these things maybe were not in place. But I also know, like, because of the focus of concussion, uh, I say sort of protection, there is now a lot more going into, okay, well, what can be done to either prevent or even help with cases of a CTE or whatever it might be. So I do believe as we go forward, the recognition that rugby is a contact sport, that's never going to change. And if you don't want to be involved in it, then ultimately don't be involved in it. That's the nature. But I think also rugby is fickle to think that it can't talk about it in a way that we need to be better and we need to do better to look after the players. And that has really started to happen, but needs more. And it's then looking after the players in the future as well. About in 10 years' time, I had a bunch of concussions. As I say, I want to make sure that I have the ability that I can look after my brain health, whether that's with supplement, whether that's with medication, whatever it might be. And I want to make sure, I hope that rugby players get looked after in that way in the future for sure. You're never going to prevent 100% of these cases. But then at the same time, what you can to do is certainly improve those stats by just being better going forward.
Can you talk about your ambassadorship with Loose Heads?
Yeah, I Lou said, yeah, it means a lot to me. It's the mental health awareness charity in rugby across the world. They were originally sort of founded in the UK by a couple of brothers and the father and a friend. Um, and their whole being was that they created this thing, I think about 2017, 2018, that there was always this missing piece in the rugby clubhouse that men in particular were just going and hiding their sort of emotions. There was like a conversation after game, oh, how are you? And like, yeah, yeah, I'm all good. Like, well, how are you really? And it was the realization that actually people were hiding a lot of things. And rugby being that bravado, macho sport, you don't want to show weakness. And in the end, they kind of said, well, this is enough. Like, let's get people talking and raise awareness and have done amazingly. For me, I'd always been kind of associated a little bit with them, just being in the professional landscape of rugby in the UK. But really, it happened in 2021, beginning of 2021. Um, One of my former coaches when I was younger was an absolute inspiration. Really taught me so much about the game. Was known so much in the community where I was raised in Cambridge, both at school level and at club level. He took his own life. Um, Crazy. So I remember even speaking to him not that long before he took his own life in the beginning of 2021. It shook the whole community, anyone that knew him, and and I remember, as I say, like I always felt bad. I was like, oh, maybe I should have checked in with him more. It'd been like when I grew up and then went professional and moved away from school, like natural things, people disconnect a bit, and no, I had no idea that this guy was suffering in the way that he was, and left behind two kids and a wife. And that for me, it was that day. Literally, it was again. I'm not a believer in fate, but there was that day. Looseheads put up a post, and it was, "How are you? How are you really?" Question mark. And I messaged them and I just said, "Guys, love what you do, followed you and whatever, but you do not know how poignant that post you just put up is to me today." And we talked back and forth, and I just remember thinking to myself, like, look, um, if there's anything that I can do as a former coach of mine, and in terms of anything to help his legacy, and as I say, I don't want to take away from the fact that he had deep friends and family that were probably closer to him than I was. I was in a different capacity, being one of his students. Then it was like, I want to spread awareness. I want to help spread awareness, and therefore join as ambassador. And I proudly managed to help bring Loose Heads to Major League Rugby in 2022. And now we go into our third season together, and Loose Heads is still proudly the mental health, mental fitness awareness charity for Major League Rugby. So long story short, but they're doing a lot of great things, and long may it continue.
When, I mean, what did Loosehead say to you when you reached out and said, this is actually a very unfortunately well-timed post that I'm seeing?
They honestly were just saying ultimately firstly how amazed and surprised I'd probably be that I'm not the first one that kind of says that to them. And it's one of the big reasons why they wanted to start the awareness. And I must say, by the way, that the awareness is through clothing as well. I'm actually wearing Looseheads branded T-shirt, and they put all profits into that, or into the business, or should I say the charity, in creating awareness programs. And their whole mission is to basically stick a loose head, a mental health lead, into every rugby club around the world. So there's someone in every rugby club around the world that is someone you can go and speak to. And eventually, there's through the resources that Loose Heads offer, be like educated in the mental health space. I am mental health first aided. I had completed my course. So, but they were just so knowing that this is why they began, because it was almost like just kept in silence, and then these are the problems that arise, and particularly for men, as I say, and particularly unfortunately men within rugby. The stories are very unfortunately incredibly frequent, and my former coach Tom Dan, I can say his name, if only he had known about these sort of organizations. And I think that was one of the hardest things, is you kind of look back regardless how you knew him, and you just think, what could have been done to prevent this? And that's why, as mentioned, I kind of like, okay, I can't personally do anything about the past, and we and family and everyone that knew him, can't bring back the past, you know what I mean? But we can at least try and do something to create a safer and better place, mental health wise, for our community, which is the rugby community.
Have you had many people reach out to you?
Yeah, in a nutshell, yeah. I think particularly in the professional game, when you actually speak to the guys, and we create ambassadors from all of the teams in Major League Rugby, and the stories are there for everyone. They either knew someone, they were going through their own battle. Um, it's it's just one of those spaces which is difficult in this day and age, because I think mental health is talked about quite a lot. I think there isn't, and I'm almost moving it on a little bit, but I think there is always a danger where people can take advantage of the conversation. At the end of the day, life is full of challenges, physically, but also mentally. Um, some are bigger than others, and for different people, they're in different shapes and sizes as well. I'm not saying a challenge that you're going through mentally is not smaller or bigger than a challenge I might be going through mentally. Everyone's going through their own different things, but I think the awareness of making sure that you know we're talking about we're talking about it, yes, but we're not using it as an excuse, because otherwise we're going to really, the people who desperately need the help and are going to fall by the wayside. If that kind of makes sense. And
Yeah, it
I'm
does.
very aware of that actually mental health shouldn't just be talked about in a negative way. It should be also talked about in a positive way. It's okay to not be okay, but it's also great to be feeling great. And like, I'm telling you, Julia, we recently met. Like, I'm feel great. End of the week, I've had a busy week, but I'm ready for the weekend, and I've had some great conversations recently. One of them with you. Like, I'm feeling good, and that should be celebrated. So that's what I mean. It's kind of like people do have these conversations with me, and we make sure we try and sort of, I guess, conquer it in the best way possible.
Yeah, I mean, so many people that I bring on this podcast have dealt with negative mental health. But in the course of interviewing them, we always talk about the time that they won a gold medal or the time that they won a world championship or the fact that they got their degree. I mean, life is full of so many of those positive mental health moments that I hesitate to dwell on negativity whatsoever in any case. But a lot of people do struggle and they don't tell anyone about it. In a
Mm,
sport where that struggle is has been so reinforced by the macho man attitude that you were talking about earlier, how do you get through to those guys?
mm. I think it's just become a lot better in recent times. I know I actually said how in this day and age, mental health is talked about a lot and sometimes can be sort of overdone and overused. But at the same time, because of the awareness is there and because people are understanding, because teams, franchises, professional organizations are knowing that it's important to look after your employees' mental health, like I feel everyone feels in a safer space. So that's what I really want to also say is I'm not saying that we can't always talk about it. No, but there are times when I do and see sometimes and almost people take advantage of the conversation of like, well, I'm not going to do this today because my mental health is bad. It's like, well, hold on a minute. Like, let's just go through this. Let's talk about it. Let's, what is this? Is this just a reaction? Like, or is this, but I think the fact that we're way more aware of the topic in the world and particularly in sport, I think I wish I had it in my beginning of my professional career. And that was what, 12, 13 or so years ago. I wish there was more of this conversation going on because it was just kind of like hide your emotions, get on with it. And you want to make it to the top, don't show weakness. Um, the reality is that that is not how it works. And actually, if you can help people and Major League Rugby, we're incredibly proud to partner with OnRise, which is a mental health resource provider, then that's going to help our athletes to achieve and be the best versions of themselves on and off the field, which is going to help performance. So, yeah, the awareness is so much more there now than it's ever been. And that is a good thing when talking, especially within a rugby world that's so men macho driven, and even in the women's game, female rugby athletes are beasts. Like they're physical human beings, and females like don't want to show weakness as well. So yeah, it's definitely people are able to talk about it more that now.
You are the first rugby player I've had on this podcast through 105 episodes. I am done with my questions. What do you have to say about the sport of rugby that could entice listeners to tune in to a broadcast or even get involved?
Wow. I hope I've done
No
an all right
pressure.
job. No, I know. You said 150 episodes. Oh no, I hope I've said the right things in comparison to the other people you've interviewed. So say that again, so I'd make sure I answer it properly. What in terms of the broadcast? Yeah, go
Yeah,
mention that
so
again.
if there is someone listening to this episode right now who wants to tune into a rugby broadcast or wants to learn more about the sport or even get involved with a local team, what do you have to say to them? What's your kind of pitch?
I will steal this pitch from a recent interview I did with the Major League Rugby chairman, Ryan Patterson, which if you go to a weekly rugby show that I'm involved in called the Rugby Rundown, then there's a clip on social media and he kind of nails it. It's the most character oh no, hold on, I'm gonna get my words wrong. Um Charismatic. That's the one. Got there in the end. Charismatic game, incredibly physically enduring, but energy that gives entertainment like the most you could get out of a sport. You're always going to be on the edge of your seat because there's so many facets of the game that are, it can be physical, It can be technically outstanding, tactically outstanding. It's got everything. It's got your basketball hands and awareness and tactics. It's got the physicality of football. It's got, the hand-eye coordination of an outfield player in baseball. I really do mean that. And bringing that all together under this umbrella of respect. And that's the thing which the sport so has is, like I said, it's a thug's game in many ways, played by gentlemen or by ladies. It's by respect. And I think how I would sell that is you will always be involved as a viewer. You will never have a dull moment that's just like, oh, what's going on now? Like there's always something going on. And I think that's very unique compared to some of the other American sports. Um, and it's why whenever I've met people who've come to their first rugby game, I promise you, Julian, not one of them has turned around and said, I didn't enjoy that. They all say, that was awesome. How can I watch more?
Like I was saying, I'm done with my questions. Your episode is slotted to come out on April 2nd, so you have a fair amount of time. If anything happens between now and then that you think you'd like included in this episode, feel free to DM me on LinkedIn. Keep me updated. Is there anything that you think that I missed about telling your story?
No, no, honestly, I think you did a great job, and there you go. My thing's just gone. Heard my email go off. No, no,
I
great,
had a
great
timer.
job. And yeah, no, I hope. I thought when you said you're the first player in 150 episodes, I was like, oh no, what did I say? Did I say something wrong? Um, yeah, I hope I didn't.
No, I mean it's amazing to have representation from other sports on because I mean I've through 105 episodes covered all the major sports. I have almost almost a dozen countries represented. It's been incredible and somehow you're the first rugby player I've interviewed. So thank you for coming on. Thanks for answering some questions and telling your story. I really appreciate it.
No, pleasure. And what's your aim with all this as well?
So, Closer Mentality is a sports psych mental health podcast. So, and it's framed kind of as a documentary. So I'll take um your answers to all of my questions and then I'll write a script. And so that will kind of inform and lead your story along. And obviously the skew is toward mental health and you're a perfect representative of that as an ambassador and having the career in rugby as a player and as an analyst. I think that that's a really fascinating take. Um, and I just think that rugby as a a facet of storytelling about mental health is a really cool perspective because there has been such bad press about sports like football and hockey and rugby surrounding mental health and mental wellness. And it needs people like you to say, it's really cool, it's really fun, you should tune in. And here's why.
Yeah. No, no, and I think, you know, it is, and unfortunately, yeah, there is concussions a part of it, and and it's not great, but it's our sport. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm just saying like that is part of it, and it's kind of like, but how do you deal with that? How do you put the best things in place, physically and mentally, to prevent, um, but also help with people's health going forward? So, no, I'm always pretty. I won't sort of. I'm pretty black and white. I like to think so. Hopefully, that was of some interest.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I know that the NFL and the MLB started implementing sports psychologists in all of their clubhouses and all of their locker rooms. Do you see that being the case with rugby going forward in the US?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely had psychologists when I was playing and in my professional career as well, both at national level and then also domestic, playing franchise club level. Um, but I think now is like the importance, for example, on Rise, which is the mental health resource partner for Major League Rugby, is now that is exactly get that in and is offering that professional psychiatry and therapy. Now, that is the difference maker between really helping if someone's got a genuine issue with their mental health, whatever it might be, whatever they're going through. There are outside professionals who can really genuinely help. And I'm not saying a psychologist is worse than a psychiatrist. I'm saying they have their own different helping hands. That's what I mean. And the fact that now we have that at the table, I in a weird way, I hope that one person uses it this year. But if it's 100 people that use it, then it's there and it's there to be used and to help people in our league and show, I think, set a standard here in America that, yeah, we're a new sport, we're a new startup industry, Major League Rugby, but we are putting mental health as one of our key cornerstones as to how we want to treat our players.
Thank you so much, Will. I'm so excited to put this episode together. Like I was saying, April 2nd, this episode will come out. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, send me a message on LinkedIn and we'll get that squared away. I hope you love the episode and good luck going forward.
Brilliant. Tag me, whatever it be, and I'll look to share.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. Have a great weekend. Take care.
Bye.